This is August 29th, 2010, and I am Betsy Wilcutts from the Lafayette Historical Society. And I'm talking this afternoon with Jim Martino. And I'm going to ask him a few questions, and he's going to give us an idea of what life was like when he was growing up in Lafayette. Jim, if you'd give me your full name and when you were born and how long you lived in Lafayette.
As Jim Martino with Earl in the middle of it. And I don't know how my dad went along with that, because he had some feuds with the English, and they always won a war and all that stuff with the United States. So therefore, naturally, I don't know that how Mom ever got my name Earl in the middle of it.
Okay, and Jim, I know you were born here, and what date were you born?
What state?
Date. When were you born?
Oh, February 3rd, 1921.
All right, good. And how long did you live in Lafayette? When did you move from Lafayette to Martinez? Or Oregon?
To Oregon.
Uh-huh.
Well, let's see, we lived up there, we lived up on a hill on the top of Release Valley Road before you go over it and drops down over the valley toward the cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, I hope you're not running too fast.
That's fine.
And that question.
About what year did you leave for Oregon?
Oh, 1971, about the middle of the year.
Good, 1971. Well, what I am mainly going to be asking you about today, since we've talked with your father and with your brother, is about Lafayette when you were growing up. And the first question is, the house you grew up in on Martino Road is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, houses in Lafayette. Tell me what you remember about the house and about the farm and the area around it.
Well, the house was built by Fred Easton, who owned all this property here. And they built the house. There was markings underneath in the basement where even Mr.
Peters
never found it, but I said it was up underneath, and it was quite faint, but it was built in the delivery of the lumber and so forth came, I guess, in 1876. And that's when it was built by Fred Easton. And I gave him, when I left for Oregon in 1971, the FE branding iron.
Uh-huh.
And it's beautiful. Blacksmith that turned that, and it's on a handle about like so for branding the cattle. FE did a beautiful job on it, and you can see it up in Mr. Peters' house in the kitchen.
Good.
It's yet there today, because I left for Oregon and I said it belongs here on the ranch, and the man that bought the house and the place there deserves to have it.
Wonderful.
That's what I thought. See? And I know Louis wanted it once too.
Jim, does the house look quite different today, or does it look pretty much like it did when you were living there?
Pretty much. They fancied it up a little bit here and there, but the house went up 2 stories and to the back. And that was it at that time. And that's why it never became a, what do you call it, um, a century house,
Uh-huh.
because additions were made later years.
All right, so we were talking about the house and how it was built as a two-story house, and then Jim is going to add a little bit more about that.
Anyhow, I guess as the family started growing more and more, they added more of a bedroom out in the back and so forth. They had one bedroom, let's see, two bedrooms upstairs. One was for Vicky when she came, and the one for Louis and John and I was upstairs. And then they added more rooms to the back of the house and added to it. They also added to where the creamery was put on off the kitchen in the front, which was another lean-to, and forward to the back. And they kept doing that. They had Artie Bucher, as I remember. He was from up there by Marysville. I forgot the town, Butte County anyhow. And he was a carpenter, and he was looking for work, and my dad paid him like a $1 a day and room and board, because we had the little old house where Louis built his house. Now that house was in there, I can't tell you how old it was. It even had a basement. And it was quite old, but I didn't know too much about it. And then I remember that Pete Rossi, he was kind of a farmer, and he rented it from my dad. And they lived there for years. And then Teresa Rossi was born there.
Now, did the Rossis farm some of the land that your dad owned, or not?
Not really. He would farm some of it that belonged to later years to Mr. Rossi over there. They owned the one up in Release Valley that says Angelo Street
Right.
and Rossi Street, and all that's named after the kids.
Right. I want to get back to, tell me the names of your sisters and sister and brothers.
Well, Louis was the oldest, and he was born in, you want it on 1915. Vicky was born, my sister was born in 1917, and John became a doctor here years later, and he was born in 1919, and I'm the black sheep. And I was born in February 3rd, 1921.
And were you born right in Lafayette? Was there a hospital here?
It was no man's land where I was born. To start with, it was Walnut Creek. Dad took her with the 1919 Model T truck that he had bought that had hard rubber-tired wheels. But he soon changed them because it would get a little too rough riding for the fruit going into the markets in Oakland, down past the Tribune. With the fruit markets they had.
Right. I think they still have some of those
I
produce
believe
markets. So
so. But anyhow, go ahead.
So he actually settled here, your dad, in 1919. Is that correct?
See, and actually, this wasn't Lafayette at that time. No, Lafayette didn't come over the hills to include all of the hills and Bralo's ranch there, which was 140 acres. And they raised like 40 head of cattle. And that comes to mind in 1927, I guess it was. They also built the tunnel.
Yes.
Okay, but also...
Oh, wait a minute. Wasn't it 1937 that the tunnel actually opened going through to Oakland?
I think it was much sooner than
Oh,
that.
well, you could be right.
I'm not positive.
That's fine.
But
It's close.
The 27, I thought, was when they, uh, see, that took quite a while to build, too.
Yes, they probably started it way back then. Anyway, you were going to say that the Barallos had a ranch.
They were from Pleasanton.
Uh-huh.
In 1906. Their water tower was blown over by the earthquake.
Oh, and so they came
Knocked over by. They had to have a water tank for Pleasanton, but there was nobody there hardly when they came there. They were probably right in 1900.
Uh-huh. You know, in talking with your father, it seems to me that I remember he said there were something like 300 people in the area when he came, about 30 in downtown Lafayette, and then 300 on farms and ranches around. Does that seem about right to you?
Our mailbox number used to be 303.
303.
Yeah.
And how did you get your mail? Did you have a mailbox out here, or did you have to go
We had
downtown?
a mailbox right there when you turn left to come up Springhill Road. But it wasn't that wide at the time, see?
Uh-huh.
And we had, my dad says, gee, we got so much peaches here, they're so ripe, we can't ship them to market because they'll bounce and get bruised all up. That's where he used to pick fruit, just as soon as he could get to them.
Mm-hmm.
But, boy, I tell you, he used to leave here around 3 o'clock in the morning to get down early and be one of the first to dump the fruit off.
And where
With
did he
this-
dump it?
Well, I mean, he would take and dump it off to the, what is now, or what is, I've got that word in my mouth right now. I have to think about the name of it. The fruit produce markets that would sell to the stores.
And was that in Oakland?
Yes,
Oh,
right
uh-huh.
down below the Tribune Tower,
Yes.
which was near also where you dropped off over into Alameda. They built a tunnel there, and I forgot when the tunnel was built.
Uh-huh.
But
Now, Jim, back to your house. You were telling me a little bit about the upstairs was for the children, and I seem to remember that at one time I heard about a fire occurring.
yeah, we had one of the Lavazolas that came up and did some electrical, and somehow or another, I guess, there was a short up in the attic. And I had to run down to get, well, let's see, the car was down here parked because we had two vehicles. The Model T truck, 1919 model, and we had bought that was years later, when the fire happened. So it had to happen after 1929, 31 or 2, because the fire started and I had to grab the 1929 car and run into Lafayette. Not to Lafayette at that time, but it was the old triple road at that time.
Uh-huh.
And I kind of highballed it down there, and then I saw a motorcycler, and I stopped him and waved him down, and I says, Martino's house is on fire. And go see Morrison down on Moraga Road, just down a couple blocks to the firehouse, and talk to Mr. Morrison. That motorcyclist, he saved our place.
That's wonderful.
He went right down there, and I turned around and started back home. And would you believe the Federal truck was a much later model fire truck, but the old Model T is the one that saved the house.
That was Old Betsy.
Yeah.
And we have that down in the Historical Society right next door to us.
You have it there?
Yes, you'll have to come visit sometime.
I want to, because
Oh.
I'd like to learn some more of the history from the other people. And Gee, I'd love to be down there sometime.
Oh, well, good. We'll have you do that. Now, tell me a little bit about the area around. Was it all in fruit trees and nut trees?
This was mostly all, and if there wasn't fruit trees, Dad planted them.
Uh-huh. And what about, were there fields of hay or anything like that?
Well, the Brallos would seed part of the property because, of course, in 1939 they bought the Caterpillar tractor that went up there and farmed the fields up there. And then they would seed that flat part down there, which is Springhill Hill School area that came in later
Uh-huh.
when they sold, and then the Lafayette bought part of all this property in the hills. And they, let's see, get back to the first part of it. The field going from the Spring Hill School now down to where it brushed up near almost to that Standard Oil station that used to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was the Brallo place, and it went up to the top of the hill and adjoined my dad's from up here.
Mm.
And I get carried away. I got so many ends I could go on, and I don't know where to stop and where to start.
Well, you're doing fine.
But that was all tomatoes. I helped plant tomatoes there one time there before the war. And oh, my back ached when I shopping and putting those things in, every 8 feet and putting in those tomato plants. But anyhow, that was fields. Up at the end of Spring Hill Road was the same thing. There was fields and flat parts that they could run and plow and disc and so forth. Here my dad, he had never had a good tractor other than a Fordson, and in the wintertime or springtime he could hardly start that thing. Some of them had special ignitions, somebody that knew more about to crank them up, and get them going. But I swear my dad put on 10 extra years on his life, and Louis would help him crank it. And then you had to learn to crank them with your thumb over the top, not underneath, or you break your thumb because it would backfire.
Jim, getting back to the farming, were there times when they would let you out of school because they needed you to work on the farm?
Well, I was really more young than they wanted.
Uh-huh.
Louis used to have to come home. He couldn't go even when he moved and went over to Diablo. I see people walking up there on the hill
Yep.
now,
Right.
on the trail.
Yep.
Anyhow, but I'm getting lost when you start asking me some of those questions. Then where did I start? And I ended up with something different.
That's perfectly all right.
But there was a lot of, and then we had water that came from the other end of the ranch from one well there, and it wasn't a heavy producing well, and it was surveyed to come and float from the other end of the ranch all the way over to the tank that held our drinking water, and for the horses and cows and all. And then in 1929, I think they built that big cement one up there, which was, I think, 17,000 gallon tank, and all in wiring and steel, and all that stuff.
For the whole neighborhood or just for your property?
Just for us.
Oh.
Because the horses would drink so much and we had so little. He had Mr. Eigard, who was, I think, Norwegian, Eigard, and he came over and dug into that well deeper and deeper, and the well was about as 12 feet by 8 feet, and dug down solid into the ground. and he dug it down, I guess, another 6 or 8 feet to get to more water. And then when I used to come home from school, of course I was the little guy, he'd send me over there to push the valve and crank that old Fairbanks Morris engine, single engine, to pump water up, and I had to flush and, oh, I forget what they call that, charge it, with water, and to get that little engine running, and that would pump out of the well into another tank that was, I think, 350-gallon wood tank with steel rods wrapped around it, And
Is there still
and
some?
I would be,
excuse me.
oh, sorry, I
No.
went over there to pump the water to fill that tank, and then that one was high enough to where it would float surveyed all the way over to Louis' place there.
Mm. Is part of that old water system still there?
The water tank is still there,
Uh-huh.
covered up, and it belongs to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who bought it from behind or what. They went an acre here and an acre there, But anyhow, it was interesting because my dad tried to figure it all out. And I think one time they dug a ditch to take the old we had a well here that was artesian.
Mm.
Out there where Mrs. Ellis used to, not this Ellis,
Oh, uh-huh.
but there was another Ellis that lived up there on the ranch, on that next road up, off on the right. And they had an alkali well that it had to plug up with clay.
Mm.
Otherwise it would kill off all the soil down below where it flowed to.
Hmm.
So he had it piped. So it came down to Springhill Road, and then it would eventually go and dump into the creek.
Speaking about Spring Hill Road, I've heard several stories about how Spring Hill got its name, and one place we saw that it was just said it was Spring Valley. Have you ever heard just Spring Valley?
Not really.
What is your
Well,
remembrance?
I don't know. I guess when the county came in, they took over some of this years later,
Mm-hmm.
and they, well, let's see. They, I guess, talked to my dad and to other people, and my dad was one of the older timers here, some of it, that were there now at the time. And he told him there was a spring way up at the end of the road. What's the name of your road? Well, he says, I called it Spring Hill Road because it's got a spring up there at the end of the road.
Okay.
And that was the end of that one.
Okay, that's really good.
That's just like mine up here. The little road I made going up to my house, then he continued with it, and there are a couple more houses up there beyond. And I was, well, I don't know if you want this on there, but Scenic Drive.
Mm-hmm.
And then found out later years that somebody else was on Scenic Drive in Lafayette side.
Oh.
So we were north of them, so I said, let's make ours North Scenic Drive.
Okay.
And they did, the county,
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I don't think it was ever made more than that.
Right.
But for the
Jim,
address,
right.
it was there.
Jim, did you grow most of your own food? You must have.
Well, my dad had his own garden just below there. He also planted that orange tree that
Yes.
is really bearing.
Uh-huh.
And sorry it wasn't on my place.
Did you have your own, when you were young, as a child, did you have your own cows and get milk
Yes,
and
we
meat
did.
from them?
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh.
And calves.
Uh-huh. Now, you were quite young during the Depression. Was that a hard time for you out here?
No, we never had a hard time because really I got to feed the cats and the dogs and all the little, bring the firewood in the house to get that old stove coked up that was hooked to a boiler. That's the kind of heater we.
That's great.
But anyhow, I don't know that you got it turned on or off.
It's on.
It's okay. But anyhow, I used to have that to do, and I used to also have to go out and set gopher traps.
Oh.
And my dad taught me how to do it, and little tricks and so forth that made catching moles. But I never did, because he did that around the house. And it was interesting. He was showing Mr. Rossi one time that. And Mr. Rossi had been over there, I think, over in Release Valley from above Roland's place, which was most of the valley and the hill and the other hill, which is just on this side of the creek.
Mm-hmm.
And hey, Mr. Rossi planted a lot of trees up there too. I think he planted most of the pear trees. And here my dad had pear trees here enough that one year we got 40 tons of pear trees. That's 4,000 pounds of, per ton.
Wow. Well,
the boxes weighed a few pounds too.
yes. Well, we still have a few pear trees, but nothing like you all had here. That must have been wonderful.
My dad saved a fig tree this big. And this was just when World War II went, and I was too busy at Mare Island, and then I got called down for something, and I had to change my vision. But anyhow, I was told I never had to go into service. I was working there pre-war,
Mm-hmm.
and then the Japanese struck Pearl Harbor. And I was talking to a painter girl they accused me of, and I was working with a machinist, even his backup, that said he wasn't gone more than 1 hour. And the leaderman should have got fired. I says, fire him. Anyhow, they took my overtime away from me. Outside machinist. I went to Navy school there, and I was working with German machinists. They were of German heritage.
Mm-hmm.
They knew their business. And they taught me a business that I loved, and I did it just precise. My eyes could tell you dimensions, but that's the way the Lord gave me my eyes. And would you believe? So anyhow, when they took my overtime away, I took off for a week and went out to Yosemite. How'd you get to Yosemite? Oh, I have friends that got a lot of gas tickets. Emil Oliveri, he used to work the Roland Ranch, which was both sides of the valley. And that hill up here that goes all the way up, Roland owned all of that. And by golly, I tell you, it was interesting. And so they finally took that overtime away from me, and I just quit the yard. I walked off. And then I got reassigned from 2B to 1A.
Aha!
And then that made the situation.
Went off to war.
But it was okay.
Jim, I want to go back just a little bit. A couple of things that I want to clarify.
Okay.
I know you went to grammar school in downtown Lafayette.
I walked every
You walked?
We walked every day, the 5 days a week, and we had one fellow, I used to remember his name yet, but he used to stop and pick us up because he worked in Oakland about the time I'd go down on the road, And I even forget what time we used to have to go, but it was fairly early, and he was heading toward Oakland on a job, and he'd stop and pick us up for years. 8 years. I went to that school, and the year that I finished that school, they started bus service the following year.
That was Lafayette School, right?
Lafayette Grammar
right down
School,
on
which all those
Moraga.
3 buildings that were right there, a couple blocks down past the firehouse.
Okay.
And then, let's see, there was one more thing I should add to that too. That What did I forget now?
Tell me a little bit more about your school days at
Well,
Lafayette
we used
School.
to walk there. We used to cross the creek to make a shortcut to get through there a little earlier. My brother John almost drowned. My brother Lou just happened to be coming by, and he saw him floundering in the water, fell into a hole in that creek that goes through Lafayette. And would you believe he pulled him out?
Well, did they have 8 grades? Did you start like in kindergarten and go up through 8th
Yeah, well,
grade?
you had one room for first and second grade or something like that, because they couldn't have too many teachers. They had Miss Christian. I don't think she ever got married. She was Miss Christian all her life, as far as I remember. She was a nice lady, and I don't know. I just was outside with Miss Christian one day. I just want to tell you, this is kind of cute. I said a bad word. And would you believe this bad word wasn't really bad, but she says, stay right here at the fountain. I don't want you moving away from here. And she went and got me some soap out of the women's bathroom and washed my mouth out with soap, because I said one bad word, and nowadays everybody uses it. But anyhow.
Okay, good. Now you've kind of told me how you got to school. Now, what about the mail? You said there were mailboxes. Who delivered the mail?
Let's see.
Was there a postman or several?
Mr. Bunker. I knew and Frank was his son, and I don't always want to call him Frank, but Mr. Bunker was, if I think about it, I'll tell you later. I don't know, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Right now at the moment, Roy Bunker.
Roy Bunker. And did he have a truck that he'd go out and deliver mail?
He used to have a wagon to start with.
Uh-huh.
That was in the early days, the early 20s that I knew of. And then after that, they came with a little old Model T or something like that. And then my folks used to get these panettone breads. There were 2 loaves put together. You know, one was flat on one end, big round panettones. They're about that big. And I don't know how much it weighed, but he used to hang it on the mailbox hook. It had a hook where you closed the door. And they out there on the mail route.
That's
and
wonderful.
people would drive by there with old cars and all that in the early days, and they'd leave the bread there because my dad never talked about ever missing a loaf. Anyhow,
That's wonderful.
it had to come over by the ferry from San Francisco, and then it went over to that rapid transit we used to have in Oakland that was a red-colored train,
Uh-huh.
and then it would come through the tunnel out to
Canyon?
Canyon.
Uh-huh.
And from there, Mr. Bunker would get it in Lafayette from the Sacramento Northern.
Uh-huh.
That's what my brother and sister used to take to Diablo High School. So when I started, they started a bus service in 1935, I guess, because I graduated in 39.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to Diablo and picked it up here where Release Valley came in. Come down over the hill, and then Pleasant Hill Road at that time, see. That was like Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
And would you believe that they started in 1939, they built Acalanes. And that was built and finished just in time for me to have missed it. I graduated in 39,
No.
and they built it, and it finished in 39. And so therefore, I didn't get a chance to ride the train either. They cut it out, I think, in 1940, 41, I think it was, as far as I remember, but anyhow.
Jim, when did this neighborhood start to change? When did they start building houses like this? And
Well, not till after 1940, really. My dad didn't sell this 1 acre down here. He sold it for $1,000. And I don't know what you paid for, and you only bought a ½ acre.
uh-huh. And actually, the house was here when we bought it.
This one was.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Right. We didn't build this house. When was the house built? Do you remember? 54 or something like that? 47. Yeah. So the neighborhood started changing. Your father started selling off lots. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
because, really farming wasn't paying off that much, and in those days, I think he sold one piece down here somewhere. Some of those pieces right there were sold in acres,
Mm.
and then the people made a driveway to the back.
Uh-huh.
See,
Uh-huh.
not all of them, I guess, but
Quite a
remember,
few.
remember
Yeah.
the gullies?
Oh, sure. Right across the street.
Yeah, they were back further, and then they sold the front, didn't they? Later.
I'm not sure, but that was like this when we moved in. But excuse me.
But
Anyway.
anyhow, this was more or less a fruit ranch, and my dad used to have his own garden right below it was fenced off in there. And then later on, he built a bigger one when we needed more than the yard up there, And they started surveying it and so forth and so on. My dad, little by little, had a vision, and he started working up the hill with Art Silvera and his D7. That was a 4-cylinder, big piston, good tractor. But anyhow, from there it went further up the hill, each year a little further. And of course I was given, behind my dad's place there was an acre that went clear later when he started subdividing up there. And he gave me 3¼ acres up there.
Mm.
Well,
Nice.
it was hilly.
Uh-huh. Yes.
And he sort of sketched out a little place there that I opened up a little more later. And anyhow, he gave Vicky one up on just before the turn where Hertzer's was.
Uh-huh. Yes.
And there's a sharp turn. Vicky had that one just before that,
Uh-huh.
still in the steep part.
Uh-huh.
And then John got the one up above her.
Oh.
See, each one
Oh,
got
I
a piece
didn't
of
know.
land. Louis got the first piece down
Right.
below.
Mm-hmm.
And then Vicky had I think a full acre up there too, and they split it down, I guess, later to sell.
Did they actually, besides you and Louis, did the
No
other
more.
two live out here?
Didn't build anymore.
No.
Then other people started coming in and buying and building.
Now, I know you raised your family here in Lafayette, and
We raised it up on top of that Release Valley hill now,
uh-huh.
up on the right. I
Oh.
just saw the lady, and her and I got the chance to talk.
Oh.
She is the second. They tore the old house that we got there because it was built out of secondhand lumber.
Uh-huh.
And my dad rented it to me
Uh-huh.
after I came back from World War II, which was in the middle of 46, because we were occupation of Japan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We left the Philippines and went up to Japan because that's, what our army did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
6th and 8th Armies, they covered the Pacific.
Jim, when you came back from the war, did you notice a lot of changes right around here? Lafayette and the neighborhood?
Quite a bit. I only saw a few buildings, that were years, really about the time that I left,
Mm-hmm.
and there were some, I don't even know what year you came in.
We didn't come until 1962.
Uh-huh.
But I think when the tunnel was finished, then people started coming out. And of course, when the freeway
The
was,
old tunnel, but I mean,
the newer one,
the newer one was
the
what
Caldecott.
year?
It was finished in 1937.
1937.
And then the freeway came and BART, and that made quite a few changes.
Remember they had a 3-lane highway which was dynamite? Because if you were and there was a middle lane, you'd want to pass an old truck or in a car, so forth and so on. And then it used to get pretty foggy up over the hills from the tunnel in Orinda, and then over Charles Hill. And then people wouldn't see, and there could be a wreck or be head on. It was dangerous.
Yes.
Lucky
Oh.
that we never ran into any big ones that I remember. But it was interesting.
I want to ask you about, did your family attend a church in the area? And what do you remember about?
St. Mary's was down in Walnut Creek on the old road, which was down through Main Street, going toward Alamo. And just as you go a block from, you might say, Mount Diablo, and you hit the road going to
Alamo.
Huh?
To Alamo.
To Alamo. St. Mary's Church was right there, the little old church. That was one that you see pictures of. It must have been built in the 80s.
Wow.
80s of 1800.
Tell me a little bit about what you did at church, what you remember about church.
Well, then they had a big building next door to it. Oh, I'm getting lost on some of this, but it was a Portuguese place where they used to have their Portuguese festivals and so forth, right next to the church, which was a big building. It's like the old townhouse in Lafayette, see? And they, well, we used to go on our old, as I remember, the whole family. I was just a little buck then. Went in the old 29 Chevy car. That was the first car we had. And I could even used to tell you, I think it was somewhere as close to $780. That was a lot of money in those days for a car. But on the way back from church down there, my dad would cut down through Walnut Creek and go over to Frank Macedo's ranch where he had cattle and lots of calves. And my dad would get those little larger gunny sacks and put all 4 of us kids in the car, one on top of each other's lap, plus the calf would have to lay on the floor in a sack, gunny sack.
Oh dear.
My dad used to buy them for like $5,
Oh my goodness.
And it was fun because you'd have those little calves, and when we come home from church, we'd come up here, well then, hey, bah, and they, but it was interesting. It was, and then the Portuguese people used to have these picnics, barbecues like, and that was next to the building there once a year. That was a big doing.
And would your family go to the Portuguese big picnics?
We were around there, but we didn't mix in with them too much.
What did you do? What did your family do for recreation?
Well, as years went on by, that was much later. There wasn't much to do. There was the Brawlos here. He was a much older man. Their children died here a few years back, during the war. And you had Mr. Rogers, who was Mr. Hink's brother-in-law, because he married Mrs. Hink, I guess. And Mr. Rogers, his name was change it to from Rodriguez to Rogers. It sounds more. That's what you remember Hink's big store?
Yeah. Oh yes,
Okay.
yes. I remember the house up there.
And there's one thing that after the war I came home, And folks didn't get a phone till, I forget, later years. And the doctor, John, he got a phone in for us, for the folks.
Oh. Right after the war?
Yes, and I got a call from Mr. I didn't get it. My stepmother got a call from Mr. Hink, and he says he wants you to go up to the sheriff's office in Martinez. And I was hired on to while they were building his multi-millionaire house, and he had hired stonemasons from England to come out and build this house for him. And the kids were going up and they were tipping over as they got it framed, and they were working on it. And that's why he had me deputized to carry a gun and go up and catch the kids.
Oh.
And every time I went up there, I would hear voices. I'd just shine the lights and they'd take off.
Good.
But anyhow, that was kind of interesting later because I had a gun permit. And from then on, I had it for 26 years after every different sheriff, from James N. Long to, I can't get all the names, and then Walt Young, he went 2 terms, and then it changed again after Walt Young. I forget who went in. But that was a different, I'm getting off the story, so you go ahead and
That's
push
all
me
right.
on to another one.
No, this was really interesting. I can't remember what you did when you lived here in this
Well, to
area.
start with, Louis had ordered a Caterpillar tractor.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, they were just coming out with the first diesel D2. And he didn't get it till 1946. The war was over.
Mm.
They wouldn't let it go after. The war broke out right after he had ordered it. And so therefore, he done without until he bought one, I think, from Tony Lemus, because he had several tractors there. And he bought a small bulldozer. It was a little smaller than the one I got later. He asked me if I wanted to go into business with him or whatever, and I said, well, we'll think about it. So we talked it over and we decided we'd rather buy one. I guess this was 1948 when he got it.
His
Really?
brother Louis,
Yeah.
got the tractor.
Well, we bought it before that, but then in 48 I was in business all around for the couple different contractors. And Marchand did a lot of work around Lafayette, Silver Springs, Black Hawk. He'd buy the whole piece of land. Now, according to my dad, what he told me once, the Indians left this area that used to be up here on that farm. Now, I don't know who planted the pear trees, but then some Japanese family came in and were farming it. Because Louis went up to the ground farm a lot of times.
So where would that have been?
Well, right where Black Hawk cuts in. Okay. So that's where, when they finished putting in the sewers and sewer lines and all, Marchand bought the whole piece of ground. And so therefore, they, well, that's after the Indians left. They left in 1916, my dad said, because he talked to one of the old timers that used to be up here, and he said that the Indians left and they went up to Lake County. Incidentally, my sister and her husband, Glenn Lane, went up and saw those Indians, and they were up around the lake. And as people started spreading out further again, they moved back further.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. There was a big piece of a bowl. This was it must have been a family bowl. It must have been 4 feet in diameter. that was up here on that Black Hawk property. And anyhow, Marchant bought the whole thing. Then after we built on that, I did all the work up there on almost every home up there.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, except for a couple of them on the hill where he needed bigger equipment or trucks to haul the stuff, and I didn't have all that. I did have a dump truck and a trailer to pull my tractor around. Anyhow, where were we in the closest part of it?
Well, the Japanese were up there.
Yeah, and they would just take care of the fruit and so forth, and then later they hired my brother with his tractor to go up there and disc the property. But Louis used to find some stuff up there that,
From the Indians.
and I found a spear over behind your place here where my dad was plowing on a side hill with a side hill plow. The kind that you went that way, and then when you got to the end, you couldn't turn around and come back. You could turn around and come back, and you'd flip the thing over, and then, but anyhow, that was on that where he caught that water line one time that came through there. It wasn't too deep. But anyhow, so let's get back to the weather part. You're gonna have to. I get to wandering about the story on and on.
You're doing great. So we have Marchant coming in and developing that whole area.
So
and you were
I did
working
all
a lot
their
of it.
64 homes out there off of Moraga Road, just as you make the first turn off on the left. That's Silver Springs.
Yes. Oh, so you were involved in a lot of the early.
Oh, I had the one up at the end of Release Valley,
And
that's another Springs or something.
yes, Silver Springs, I think.
Silver
No.
Springs was Lafayette. I
Oh,
believe.
well then, I can't remember, but yes, I know which one you mean.
But anyhow, hey, we had a lot of work. But anyhow, then, well, the story goes that Paul Marchant had me doing all his work. See, he was a younger fellow. He had been in World War II over toward Germany, or just occupation maybe after, I don't know. But then he finally sold years later. He was killed, you know that.
I didn't.
Okay, I'll tell you how it happened. He asked me if I wanted to go. I took a flight with him one time, and it was canvas wings.
Oh.
Canvas
Right.
wings on a single engine, and I told him I had some work to do and I couldn't do it right then. And so I refused him. So he asked one of the fellas, he built a house on Acalanes Road, who had 2 or 3 kids. And that guy went with them. So he flew into Reno, and he had a little scooter that he could go around from place to place, or rent a car or do with whatever he wanted. And finally he ended up on the way back. They were going to go, and he says, I'd like to go south a little bit more. And he went down, like following Highway 99 or 97, was it, in the main drag in Nevada, going north and south. And he went down to a town, forgot the name of the town right now, but it was a large town south of Reno, probably 50 miles. And then he stopped down there at an airport. And on the way back, they were going to take off, and the FAA talked to him and said, there's a big storm coming in. I guess he didn't have a 2-way radio in the plane. And there's a big storm coming in. You're going across the, yeah, he says, we're kind of going up that way over the Sierras. And he said, well, it's pretty dangerous. And he says, well, if it's pretty dangerous up there, it'll be the same down here. So he said, we're going to take off. So they took off. Then the big boom sound, there was a fireman way out in the woods up there in the mountains where he heard that boom too. It didn't sound like a, you know, um, a regular storm. It was a boom like of an airplane or something. So they finally found it. And they picked them up in sacks.
That's too
They
bad.
were they just hit that storm and then it went straight down, that little airplane. And he had a mind of his own. He was a major in the service, and he said, "Hey,
Oh,
you
no,
do things, you do them."
Mhm.
So he did it, and that man lost his family that lived right up on top on the left of Acalanes Road. Then it went to Glorieta, remember?
Oh, yes, right.
But anyhow, that's where I guess the Lord took me away from it,
Oh,
because I was busy and
yeah.
I had to do this other work that I got into right there at first. I didn't know how to run the bulldozer so much, but I did run Amy's Caterpillar tractor, which was the main principle, except for with the blade and all that was a little different. But I learned.
You learn by doing.
I learned by doing, and I learned to shoot the grades and put a rag on the smokestack, my eye level, and I could check the grades on all one, and if it was 3 feet high, you'd have to cut 2.5 feet and so forth, and then fill down on the low end, so you'd have backfill and all. But I learned it, and then I got so that I did it so precise. They said, I like it, real level. If it was 80 feet long, I'd get it within 3 inches if they wanted level, because I'd get off and check it. And there were some people who were in a hurry and said, "Hey, you got to do it faster than that." I said, "You wouldn't be happy with because you want me to go in and do it fast. It's like wash those windows in 5 minutes. Sometimes you get a bad job."
Jim, what did your father think about you and Louis going into all this big
He
heavy
already spent all his money mostly on the roads that he did put in.
Uh-huh.
See? And that was the end. I never got really any more except for making a few spots later on in years,
Uh-huh. Great.
But anyhow, he was an ingenious man, or whatever you want to call it. He always had a forethought, about how and what things are going to be, and he started in on this here property stuff and so forth, and he done a good job.
He certainly did, and we feel very fortunate to be here and enjoying it. And I know you come back a lot, which is nice.
I got stories now like here. I told you about that poor man that run the tractor, and then the tractor rolled down on part of the hill where he was leveling, and the engineers, wanted him to put a 13-foot tractor into a 7-foot lane, and the tractor went down over the hill and killed the man. Actually didn't kill him outright. It tore his leg off at the knee because the tractor reversed. He jumped off the tractor and the tractor reversed and ran over his one leg, and he lived 4 days in the shock. Finally, we learned that in the service about shock, that you had to be taken care of and given shots to relax and so forth and so on. He just died from the shock.
Dear.
It came and hit him all at once. But
Jim is going to tell
you
us.
tell me when it's
Jim
ready.
is going to tell us about a fruit stand that they started down near Springhill, and he'll tell us about it now.
Well, we started out by bringing those strawberry baskets filled with peaches. I forget, there was 4 across and 8 across the wrong way. And I took one down there and And then my dad says, well, sell them for 50 cents. Those days, it was still pretty good money, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I ran home, told him, hey, and there was an old bridge there that they had these props that supported the bridge, and I would put a box of peaches there, and people would see them and they'd stop and, boy, I'd always have an extra one to take, you know, so they could taste them. That's all they needed. So I ran home and got another box. My dad made up another one. He says, I've got plenty here because the heat came in and ripened the peaches up so fast that we have to get rid of them. So I must have run up and down there for 4 or 5 times in one day there.
How old were you when you were doing this?
Oh, probably 8 or 9,
Oh, okay.
something maybe there.
Uh-huh.
10, who knows.
Yeah.
Anyhow, we sold quite a few, and my dad says, shucks, he says, I'll bring a table and put it down there, and then drive down with the truck and bring more peaches down there that are ripening too fast. Because they could lose tons of, you know, peaches and pears and stuff if you couldn't take them to the market soon enough. So we went from there, and then he brought a table down there, then finally he brought an umbrella to put down there. And a chair for us to sit on, or a box. And eventually it got so that people coming out of Oakland taking road drives up and down, hey, they started asking for that fruit on weekends, you know. And it got to be a family business, and then we built a little shed about from here to the fireplace, and probably, and with shelves on there, and they would bring down boxes of fruit.
Now,
And peaches, pears, and apples, and so forth as the fruit. We had up to, I forget, 15 different types of peaches.
whoa.
Yeah, Mayflower was the first peaches.
Uh-huh.
Alexander's was number 2 that come in a few weeks or while they were overlapping. And then we had so many others, I can remember a few of them. Then we finally ended up with the Alberta peaches over here. Then the ones we loved the most were the Carmen strawberry.
Mm.
They were out here in the middle, just only 1 or 2 trees, and they were beautiful. And then we had crab apples, we had Gavensteins, we had pippins,
Oh.
and we had all kinds of, and bellflower apples.
Mm.
Those are the big, you know.
Did you have Bing cherries?
Yes, we had the cherries over close to the Bralo's place. I think sometimes they'd walk over and have a few too, which was across the line. I went over and stole some of their grapes. They had grapes right down here to the school, the last house there on Springhill.
Uh-huh. Jim, tell me exactly where this fruit stand was. Was it down where Springhill School is?
Well, near the road. It was only a 2-lane road. It was first gravelled, and you know, in the years ahead, I guess in the early 20s. And they used to go down, and I've gone down with Bralo's to pick up gravel in the creek, which is off of that street. Now it isn't St. Stephen's, but it goes down to a church as you start going into Lafayette, and then off on the left there. And they Bralo's had me shovel some. I was just a kid, really, and that's how they made roads, with gravel from the creeks. And that was a good place where bowbeers used to have. And hey, I guess you just go down there and pick it up, and whether they paid them anything or not, I don't know.
That's great.
But hey, it was fun. It was early learning days. But that fruit stand sat there till Then the war started. And my dad kept having people, well, where's the fruit stand now? Well, you got to come up to the ranch. Well, they wanted to know because they wanted to buy canning pears and peaches and apples and a little bit of everything. Plums. My dad used to get first and seconds in the state fairs with some of his plums and the Gloomer Sioux pears. Nowadays they can't even name them. The names that my dad scientifically found from the markets and all. And he used to get first prize of those in the state fair.
Wow.
And Louis had all the ribbons, blue ribbons and red ribbons and yellow ribbons from all the different fruit that my dad, of course, he was kind of conniving that liked to get into a little bit of everything. But anyhow, what are we going to go on to now?
Okay. I'm asking Jim now to tell us what he thinks about Lafayette today. He's been here for around here and the area for almost 90 years, and so I'm curious what he thinks about our area today.
Well, I like our area. It's got nice people and it's got nice homes up on it. It was a great place to come and sit under a tree and pop the birds, because I was 8 years old when I asked my dad if I could fire one of those 22s, you know. And he used to have two kind of shells. One would be bird shot, but you could only shoot from here to the window there, and that's as far as it would reach, because you had twisted barrels in there, and your bird shot would, really not do so good. But after I shot 3 birds, 3 shells, he let me continue. And that was right off to your right here, probably just a little bit into Boroviak's yard, was I can't tell you the name of that. It was a pie cherry, more like, a little smaller, and they weren't very sweet, but they were for pies, and you put the sugar you wanted into it. But other than that, he used to let me go under the trees. The fig trees were usually a different season, and I used to have a ball shooting those things, but then he got to shooting those bullets, and when we started nicking the electric wires, where we got from Bralo's here next door, Springhill School, they ran the lines, I think 2 poles in my dad's property. And for PG&E, you had to sign a piece of paper or something. But anyhow, it worked out okay. And I was starting to tell you about that tree, though. When I left and went overseas right after I saw that, and I said, oh, gee, that tree's going to die. And then my dad says, yeah, if I can't stop it. When I came home, I found out what my dad done to it. He bridge grafted from the ground level down underneath and up to just outside. And took little limbs, big as your fingers, and bridge grafted a whole bunch of them and grafted them down all the way around, and when I came home it was all healed.
Oh my goodness. Your father just knew how to make things right, didn't he?
Well, he learned, I guess, from other farmers too. And it was beautiful that he was able to save that, because I've got a lady in Martinez that has a tree that just like those figs, and she hasn't got many people that like them. And figs only last a short time, and when you pick them ripe, they're good and sweet, and I love that. And that lady comes down, she'll go pick them, but she says, you don't climb on a ladder, because they went back east to New Newfoundland or someplace back east to see part of their family. And I went up and picked some of them there. And she says, just you don't climb the tree and or a ladder, especially. She didn't want me to fall. She comes down there and goes and picks them herself and brings them to me in bags. And I just love them.
Yes. Well, you know.
I have to trade off some See's candy once in a while.
That's a good trade. Well, Jim, thank you so much for.
I don't know if I've helped you much today.
You've helped us.
I get carried away with, incidentally, you're bringing back things about the time I went past Acalanes High School. It wasn't Acalanes High School then. And they had the Standard station there. And there's a roadway going up where the Boviers lived. That's where that something hill drive goes, shortcut goes out to the Lafayette foothills and to the station where they park cars.
Uh-huh. Did you know Louis Stein? Did you know anything about him?
Marie Stein?
Louis Stein.
That's on a farm over here behind the high school. Yeah, I went to fight a fire there
Oh,
once.
you did? Uh-huh. And so his property was over by the high school?
Mm-hmm.
Was it actually is the high school built on his?
Actually, it was on the other side of the creek, I believe.
Uh-huh, okay. Well, we've had a lot of fun talking, and we're going to try to catch up on some more stories later on, but I thank you very much for the time and for the very nice time you've given us.
You remember Springbrook? Now Springbrook came out there, and the other end of it over there used to be the piano place,
Uh-huh.
an organ place that played organ, building that was out there,
Okay.
just on that flat side there. And I was coming from Alamo, down that Alamo Drive,
Mm-hmm.
which was past that St. Mary's Church,
Mm-hmm.
made a left, and that's Mount Diablo, going all the way, to Lafayette. And I saw smoke coming up. I said, gee, that's getting close to where I'm going. And I had the tractor, and I just finished a job over there. I don't know, it was about probably 4:30 anyhow. And tractor was nice and warm and don't take long to crank it up again, And I pulled right up there, and there's Springbrook, and I pulled over on Springbrook, and there was a little building there. Then they built a bigger place there later where they put organs and pianos and so forth and so on. I don't know if you remember that.
I don't actually.
But it was there for years. And I just pulled in just below them. It was more like open field. That was on a fire, all fire. I just backed the cat up there, put her in gear, and started cutting. You split the dirt in a lower gear and keep the tractor going, and it was on a slope, and that dirt would just smother the fire, even if I wasn't even on it.
Oh, amazing.
But anyhow, it was never too high. And I went down there, and I never got paid for that from Nottingham. Nottingham was the fire chief, and I found out later that I should have got paid for that job, but we didn't send him a bill because we did later and never got paid for it.
Uh-oh.
He was saving the county money. See, the county paid for firefighters that would go out with a tractor and put out a fire.
But not you.
And I never wanted to answer anything with Nottingham anymore. And,
Well,
but it was okay. I put that fire out, and then that's actually where they finally put the cutoff from Lafayette, and you make the turn and corner there, and it goes along the foothill and it drops into Highway 680 now. Anyhow, I went to climb up the hill. It was so steep that the soil was so loose, I just sat there and spun, and you can't do that too much because you make a big pile behind you, when you back up over it, and Joe Lucas dumped his that way. But anyhow,
Well,
I was careful, and I came back around and went up an easier route where I had put the fire out, but some of it had gone up the hill already, see? And around Springbrook,
Mm-hmm.
and missed some of the trucks. Finally went up there and stayed near the houses.
Mm-hmm.
I went up there on the hill, and then I started coming down where I thought would be a good place to make a fire break. It wouldn't go north more, see? And would you believe I hit a yellow jacket's nest in the ground? And here was some firemen following me, just followed me all the way up with these 5-gallon cans of spray. That's kind of, they didn't have any four-wheel drive deals, you know. And would you believe, I finally told them, because come on down, let's get on down here. And those yellow jackets caught some of those firemen. Boy, they run like hell down the hill. But I finally found that my cat was sucking in as a sucker fan, and it got all grass plugged up, and my thing was going up to 200.
Uh-oh.
And I got down below there right where they were. Finally, there was no fire there. And those poor firemen, they ran and left up there. They didn't stay up there anymore. But the yellow jackets, they hurt.
I just was stung by one. I know.
When I got 6 or 7.
Oh.
One time I hit my glasses and they broke onto the track on steel,
Mm-hmm.
and broke the glasses. I mean, this lens, you know. And hey, I had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I had bees that you'd have to dodge. And I finally would go and buy this stuff, and I'd charge it to the contractors. I had this one stuff that they sprayed, and it sprayed out just a smear, not a string. That you couldn't catch a yellow jacket that way. Only by just, if you got 10 or
Right.
12 of them, you might have got 1 or 2.
Right.
But
Well,
they had a spray that I used to buy from Standard Oil, and they had these one canisters. Man, those there would wipe them out one swift.
great. Okay, we're going to stop with that, and thank you so much.
Okay.